Great to be here today. We actually, for the first time, have two guests with us on today's show, Raimy. So by all means, jump right in and take away it on the intros.
Okay. All right. So I am very pleased to introduce Jonathan DeLange and Evan Cox. Jon DeLange is a strategic connector and visionary fundraiser. He began driving significant growth early in his career, scaling as a fundraiser, and now serves as the Senior Development Manager at Summit Ministries, where he helps faith-based organizations grow by building thriving giving programs and mentoring the next generation of leaders. Evan Cox brings over 15 years of experience guiding Christian ministries and cause-driven brands. He's a Story Brand certified guide, which we have to talk about because I love Donald Miller, who helps organizations align their marketing and fundraising so they don't just ask for support, they build lasting mission-aligned relationships with donors. Evan is known for transforming complex challenges into clear, actionable plans. Together, Jon and Evan, through strategicfundraisingplan.com, have coached hundreds of Christian nonprofits in crafting clear messaging, smart data strategies, and streamlined donor engagement. So thank you, Jon and Evan, for being here with us today. I'm going to kick this off to you and just ask a very basic question. I want your origin stories in the field. Tell me how you came to be in the philanthropic field.
I love it. I'll go first, and then Raimy, can you be my hype man before every call? Like, can you come for about 3 minutes and just do like the "Are you ready to rumble"? Because that was a great intro. Just like precursor to any calls, I'm going to have you hop in.
Absolutely. I got some great music I can play behind it too. You'll have a great entrance.
I do think, Evan, that he said 50 years of experience. So
I said 15.
well, as a storyteller, Rainy, you really, I think, weren't so clear. It looks great for having been in the business for 50 years.
I'll enunciate better next time.
Numbers are very fluid here. What's a couple of decades between friends? Honestly, I don't know. Okay, I'll jump in first because mine is probably more lackluster than Jon's. I'll let Jon talk through like some of the big ones. But for me, what I realized is early on, I started doing, even as a teenager, short-term faith-based mission trips where I'd have to raise a couple $100 to a couple $1,000. And I leveraged my personal network, AKA my family and friends, to help me get started in something that I was like, oh my gosh, I really care about this. We're making a difference. I'm learning a lot about culture and society and what kind of impact I want to make in the world. And then eventually actually lived overseas cross-culturally for a season. And not only did we have to raise our own support, but we were in the midst of building business entity and programs and all the things. And it gave me such empathy for like, oh my gosh, fundraising is not easy because you're doing all this work and then you also have to do marketing and put out a news. Like it gave me such empathy for that. And then I started working for a large international faith-based entity based in St. Louis. But unlike a lot of folks who are like, hey, I was a program officer, I was a major gifts officer, I was a landscaper, I was cutting the grass outside. Literally, I was coming off of the mission field saying like, I want in this next season to be able to make a difference. And I was doing that on property. And then for a season, did that until I was able to go inside the building, quote unquote. And during my internal interview, they said, okay, we want to do A, B, and C. And I was like, checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. The fourth thing that they wanted is, hey, we'd really love to do a little bit more work in grant writing. And so me as a savvy young guy, I was like, of course, like I did some work in college around that. It was one day in a larger class, but that was a minor detail. It was a Friday and they said, okay, we'll come back for the second interview on Monday. And I bought Grant Writing for Dummies at the local bookstore on the way home and read it the entire weekend. Came back and then walked my way through what I would do based on what the book told me to do, got the job. And my first big gig was implementing a grant writing program because they had never done it before. And at that time, grant writing was something that we were kind of figuring out. And we thought we would start with a fledgling nonprofit at the time called Charity Water. So I was dialoguing with some Scott Harrison guy. I was like, hey, this is really good. I love this model. It's brand new. And we didn't know whether we were funding them or they were funding it. But that was my entry point into like fundraising and marketing and grant work. And then as most nonprofit leaders would see, I ended up doing just about everything under the sun over the next 15 plus years. I sat in every seat outside of finance and marketing or finance and HR and realized, oh my gosh, all of these entities have to work together. And then I met John, and John and I are like, hey, when we do this kind of work, it's really cool to tag team and see his experience and my experience come to the table. And so at that point, John, I'll let you tag team and kind of share your story.
Sure. So my story begins on a strawberry farm. My parents have a fruit farm, and I grew up in that environment. We always had more work to do. Everything was urgent, and I really wanted to go out and make a difference. And so as a Christian, it seemed like it was ministry or politics or something like that I needed to go, maybe move to another country and try and share my values. I ended up getting into politics and did that for a few years, volunteering with a organization that took me to 7 US states. And I worked on the governor's campaign in Texas, and realized quickly that I was in a spot where I would be sitting in a lot of offices, empty offices, calling people that didn't want to talk to me and eating bad pizza every night. And so that gave me a bit of a perspective on the industry on that side of the world. And I still wanted to make a difference. And a friend invited me into a role with a nonprofit. I actually got to shadow the CEO of an organization. He had been leading that organization for 25 years. I went with him on visits, and we met with donors, put together proposals. I learned to write in his voice, and he recommended me to be the director of development soon after I turned 21 at a similar organization. So I walked in on October 3, and we had to hit our $1 million goal by the end of the year. And I realized I had lots of things to do. I didn't know where to start, and I really wanted a plan. And so that story is always echoed in my mind. What we do now is help swap out all of the things that leaders could do in their fundraising for a simple plan to follow that actually gets results.
Wow, I feel like such an underachiever. I get
No.
But I really love, those were amazing stories. Like, I grew up in a middle income, a good family in Brooklyn, New York, and had none of those experiences. Like, I just got fired from my.
I've always wanted to travel to New York. I'm listening to an audiobook now about how the city became what it is, and your borough is fascinating, Vinny. I'd love to visit someday. You'll have to give me some recommendations when we're done recording.
Yeah, I haven't been to Brooklyn in a long time, and it's funny. I actually told my mom fairly recently, the next time she goes back, she just look around. She's like, "Why?" I said, "You know how dirty Brooklyn is." Like, it just. She's like, "No, it's beautiful. It's amazing." I'm like, "Come on, it's not beautiful. I mean, the people are amazing, and it's a great place to grow up. But like, come on." But anyway, those are amazing origin stories. I love it. I really love it. And then, how long ago did you guys like connect up and then think about doing stuff like this kind of thing together?
Oh, that's great. I'll start, and then John can fill in the gaps. Because if I start, then I can say whatever he wants, and then he has to either backtrack or go with it. I started my own company doing consulting, marketing, and fundraising work in 2017. Got certified in the StoryBrand framework. Raimy, we talked a little bit about that in 2019. And then it was about 3 years ago that we had a client come online. They needed a variety of things, but one of the things that they wanted was a strategic fundraising plan. And I was like, that sounds great. We can definitely do that. I've done things like that before, but I'd followed this guy on LinkedIn for quite a while called Jon DeLange, and he was talking a lot about fundraising and happened to talk about a fundraising plan at some point in the weeks leading up to it. And so I was like, hey, what if we tag teamed on this one? And I would just love to get like your perspective, not only on this deliverable, but like your approach to fundraising. And my professional development budget for this month is going to be bringing you in as a subject matter expert. Turns out that custom deliverable not only went so well, but I was like, oh, we could turn this into a product. So John's been stuck with me ever since. It's been about 3 years, and we've been serving nonprofit clients, mostly in the faith-based sector ever since.
Absolutely. It really is a LinkedIn, I won't say love story because that's not the, but I love the alliteration here. So
Raimy, what a controversy. This is controversy right here.
Hilarious. That's actually how Vinny and I know each other, and Raimy as well, because of Jeremy Stern. Shout out to the great team at CosMatch.
Yeah.
I had started a business soon after the origin story that I was telling earlier wrapped up. I realized there were a lot of organizations in the similar vein to the one I was serving that had 10 out of 10 passion, but maybe 3 out of 10 or 4 out of 10 enthusiasm for fundraising and getting results in growth and marketing. So that was why I started a separate business at that time doing digital marketing work. And that's always been going in the background as my career has developed. So I began writing on LinkedIn, and Evan called me, and it seemed like an opportunity for us to help an organization get a handle on the first time they'd ever done individual fundraising. They had a number of program service participants who had financial transactions with the organization, but they'd never raised a dollar through personal solicitation or donor activation efforts. So we started from the ground up with that client and gave them a plan that they could follow for 12 months as a result of our engagement with them.
I'm going to do a little bit of interfaith work here, guys, because
Sure.
you know, I don't know really that much at all about fundraising or charity giving in the Christian world. I mean, John, we and I talked about a project a few years ago, and it never materialized ultimately. And it was an idea when I was working at Cosmatch to move into that space a little bit, but it didn't happen while I was there. But give us a background, if you would, about what Christian giving looks like and what drives it and what's interesting and what's mission and what's the language around it that two Jewish guys based in the Middle East could actually understand.
That's a great question. So as a representative of maybe being Christians or something like that, I'll see if I can thread the needle for us.
More controversy.
Exactly.
Love
So
it.
fundraising is built on, I would say you can go back to the definition of philanthropy. It's kind of love of others and the community, and it's based in the Judeo-Christian value set that everyone is valuable and worthy of care. And so that's one thing that I have as a core value is people are valuable not because of what they give or what they do, but because of whose image they're made in. And so at fundraising in the Christian context means that we can never go down the transactional route where we only ever care about people as a function of how many zeros are on their check. There's a number of nuances that go along with it as well. People have regular rhythms of gathering in their faith community of churches and synagogues, et cetera. And those provide opportunities where people have shared experience and shared language and shared culture. And so being in a denominational setting or something like that, you have certain norms that you need to adhere to. And with as many people as there are out there and as many different faith expressions that are out there, you can kind of run the gamut of types of expression in your work. Some people have preconceptions around money or around social engagement, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of the day, I mean, it comes down to great storytelling. It comes down to speaking to people's shared values and inviting them into the practicing of the principles that are in their holy text.
Is when you talk about seeing the donor as a person and not as a transaction, not as a dollar sign, is that something I couldn't tell if you were talking about that as an ideal, or is that really baked into the communities that you work with? Do they innately feel that, or is that still something that you need to impress upon them as you're working with fundraisers?
I like that question a lot. Evan, I love your input as well. You worked at organizations even larger than the ones that I've worked in, because certainly it's an ideal, Raimy, but it's also because I would argue that the market forces of the fundraising industry push against it many times. And so actually living out that ideal means that you have a number of hidden motivators, factors, KPIs, et cetera, that kind of push back on someone who might want to start at the bottom of the donor report and reach out to people that give $2 and $3 instead of at the top where it might be 4 or 5 figures.
And my kids are all swimming in a summer swim league this year. And I told my son after his meet last night, what got you here won't get you there. And I oftentimes feel the exact same way about our approach to fundraising, especially if you're like an executive director led, smaller grassroots nonprofit. What got us here is in scripture, in regular rhythms of attending church or a house of worship. You're going to see people give a tithe or an offering, or they support a missionary or a cause. There are things that sometimes are inductive of generosity, and that is a healthy baseline. But oftentimes, what we can see is that those easily become transactional. I put money in an offering plate. I give and put it in an envelope. I might hear back, but sometimes it's a little transactional. What got us here is a spirit of generosity. But then when they have to step into the role of, oh, I need to fund and support and market whatever cause we care about, we default to what we also see in corporate society of sales or sales and marketing. And the reality is, fundraising as a transaction is just asking for money. But most nonprofit executive directors don't like asking people for money. In fact, most people don't like asking other people for money. It feels awkward or weird if you're not used or accustomed to it. What we try to do is reframe fundraising as not tactics to follow and not technology to use, but it's actually a simple process of starting and building new relationships that go deeper and deeper over time. And when we reframe it that way, you take an executive director who has relational skill and they can say, like, oh, I might need to use technology at some point. I might need to use a tactic for a campaign at some point. But at the heart of the matter is what got me started is a care for people in relationship. And I could actually use that skill now as the centerpiece of what I'm doing in my fundraising and marketing plan today.
The way that we
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
the way that we usually describe it is organizations ignore the second largest opportunity they have for ministry many times by treating donors with a transactional mentality, because you're meeting the practical and physical, emotional, spiritual, etc. needs of your service users, while at the same time you have an opportunity to do emotional needs meeting for your donor base as well.
Mhm.
And so by having that mindset as a executive director, fundraiser, et cetera, you're not only practically meeting needs of your service users, you're also meeting the needs of your donors as well. And people have an innate
Yeah.
need to participate, to give, to make the world a better place. We derive meaning and joy and value from participating, especially participating as a community. People are starved for community. And that's one of the things that we find really valuable, inviting people into faith-based fundraising, because they get to express their deeply held beliefs through the act of giving to a cause that they believe in.
That resonates very heavily for me. Just on a couple of levels, having served in a clergy role, I know it's obvious, right? At some point in my career, and having been on that side of the ask in that space, whether it was for the synagogue itself or local organizations. So a lot of what you shared, I would have appreciated knowing at the time, and having not known it. So made it much more difficult. But also from the standpoint of speaking in that way about it for the donors who are congregants or whoever they may be, your neighbors or whatever they may be, and using that kind of language around it so that they can live and swim in that, as opposed to feeling like, they're just coming for my wallet and for more money and an ask and another donation, and stop it already. And like all that other sort of fatigue around giving just hits very hard for me. I love it. And it's stunned silence on the rabbi thing, right? Yes. Happens all the time. It happens all the time.
No, I think it's perfectly illustrated with an example. When I was serving as like our director of development, we called it partner care at the time, but director of development was the functional role.
Landscaping?
This was after landscaping, right? As I had moved through the organization, one of our top donors who had an individual relationship with multiple people on our fundraising team reached out because her husband was in health decline. And she was actually calling from the hospital. And she called, and one of our team members was also a pastor, pastoring a local church. And she uttered the words, "He's not going to be with us much longer, and I don't know what to do." And the pastor on the other line said, "Well, I've actually walked through this on more than one occasion, and I do know what it looks like and what it feels like. I'll be at that hospital," and I think it was 4 or 5 hours. And he drove to the hospital and walked them through the process of grieving together while they were both still there. And then even afterwards, I think if memory serves me correct, we sent them flowers and helped facilitate part of the, like, there was a piece where it wasn't about money at that time. It was about, oh my gosh, they didn't have a community around them that was faith driven, because they would have dwarfed a local church in their giving. Like, they would have outsized their church budget. They were relying on us for a part of their faith community. And it wasn't about money at the moment. It was about being able to serve and give back. So, kind of one of those examples of, you've got two causes, but for most nonprofits, the second one might be right under your nose and you don't even realize it sometimes.
One last anecdote on the meeting of the needs. I have an employee in my role with Summit Ministries who reaches out to our monthly supporters. And he shared with me at one point, he got in touch with a monthly supporter who told him that he believes so strongly in the work that we do, as well as several other organizations, that he's giving every single month at as much as he can. And this person is on a fixed income in the middle South in the United States. And he found out later in the call that this person actually doesn't eat lunch. So that way they can have more room in their budget for supporting about 30 ministries. And so the employee that I'm talking with, he's relaying the story, and he's sharing details. And I asked him, how long were you on the phone with this guy? He's like, well, about 30 minutes. And that interaction became several others. And I was in this employee's office the other day, and he had a personal Christmas card on his shelf from this individual who doesn't eat lunch because he wants to support ministries. That person, whose budget is already so tight, had enough of a connection with a fundraiser at a nonprofit who was meeting his emotional needs, sharing the impact of his giving and connecting him with the cause, that he went out and bought a personal Christmas card to send to the fundraiser at the ministry. And I think that speaks to the value that we can offer to our supporters, and how we give them the gift of connection and care, independent of the dollar figure that's on their.
Wow. Okay. I have a question. I really hope I'm going to articulate this well, but it's not fully formed because I'm just reacting to what you're saying here, and I find it really fascinating. So here it goes. Seems to me like one of the things that you're talking about here is that people are giving sort of as a expression of their identity, in this case of their Christian identity. And that's really what they want to see seen and fulfilled in that relationship with a fundraiser. And if I have that right, I'm curious what is absent from that message right then and there, playing upon someone's identity, is the actual mission of the organization and the impact that it's having. And again, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm thinking about it through a lot of the Jewish organizations that we work with, balancing how we play upon someone's identity as a donor, and then focusing at the same time on the message of, this is the impact that you're going to have when you donate. And sometimes when you have really limited real estate to choose what your message is going to be, I'm curious how you balance that when you're working on a message, that identity versus the impact-driven fundraising.
Sure. So I'd say I'm actually going to borrow a framework from Alan Clayton, who wrote the book Great Fundraising Organizations. Highly recommend. I don't know if we shouted out other resources in here or not, but Evan's heard me talk about Alan Clayton's book for nonstop for a couple of months here. But he has this framework called itch and scratch around meeting supporter needs. And the itch that you feel is the real estate that you take up, and you talk about how things are going to be better when this problem is relieved, right? You think about the opportunity that someone has to solve a problem in the world or meet a need, or et cetera, et cetera. And then the scratch on the other end is the relief that you feel when you've taken the action, you have the peak experience of giving or of participating, volunteering, attending, et cetera. And then you use the opportunity where you confirm identity, you share the impact, and draw the person into the longer stewardship relationship where we're continually confirming the fact that they have made that choice. The world is now a marginally better place because of their action, and you are appreciative of who they are as evidenced by their action in giving.
So you're like walking a line there, like you're balancing both ends of that stick at the same time, right? With this, it's in the scratch, right? to get both of those things right so that both sides of those things ultimately benefit. Do I get that right?
Yes, and Raimy's question about real estate, right? You have a donation page, or you have an appeal, or you have a peer-to-peer fundraising checkout experience. Prior to the peak moment of giving, you want to focus on what is being solved and what is the problem. In the copywriting framework, problem, agitation, solution. Like you're speaking a little bit to the solution, but you're helping people get to the point of decision. And then after that, you're confirming identity and bringing them along and inviting them to continued expression of that shared value.
Evan, you're like, you want to dive in here? You want John stealing your thunder?
He did a great job. Raimy, you had mentioned being a fan of Don Miller and kind of the story brand framework. From my vantage point, when we get into tactical execution of this, what it looks like is, let's use the clean water organization since we mentioned Charity Water earlier. From a message standpoint, if you're talking directly to an audience, let's say it's in Ethiopia, you're going to use language like, you want clean water. You need a cup of clean water, because the thing that they tangibly don't have is liquid to drink. But if I was going to use that exact same messaging to a donor here in the States or almost anywhere else, they're going to go upstairs or across the room and get a cold cup of water. It's not what they need. Under the umbrella of an organization that offers clean water, that's fantastic. That is kind of your overarching controlling idea or theme. But as you get into specific audiences, you're like, oh my gosh, that donor wants to make a difference, or that donor wants to leave a legacy or make an impact. Hopefully you can get a layer deeper than that. We worked with an organization where we realized, yes, everyone in their market is saying you want to make a difference. Here was their unique vantage point with their audience. They realized that most of their donors had gone through hardship at some point in their life. And a major impetus for why they gave is they wanted someone else to not experience the same hardship. So it wasn't just make a difference. It was the pay it forward or help someone else shortcut their path to success and not have to walk through the same thing that you walked through. How can you dial that into another level on your messaging? And a lot of it is, like John said, dependent on your real estate, the medium, or the channel that you're working into.
I'm curious, just on a slightly different aspect of it, because a different issue of balance is between, let's say, the religious institution and the common organization that's out there. So how does that, I know in the Jewish community how that sort of works a little bit. People have their 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 organizations that they give to, but how does that translate, let's say, into your world on this, into the ministry, or just generally speaking, how people see giving through the church, let's say, first, or giving to organizations first, and that balance?
Mm.
So
J-
I think this is a great question, Bini. And here's where my mind goes as we think about this. So I have conversations with people that read the Bible and they read it literally, and so they arrive at percentages as a result of their reading of the scriptures. And so some people are in the spot where they say, look, this percentage of my gross income or my net income is going to go to my local church community. And then in addition to that, they read the tithes and offerings passages of scripture to say, look, the offerings can go on to other things. Other people get to a spot where they say the work of the kingdom is more generalized outside of just the building or the denomination or the expression of Christianity. And so work that benefits the kingdom of God, so to speak, or the work that benefits the world as a component of the kingdom in their minds is all the same. And so some people, they build their philanthropic priorities in that manner. I think on average, people generally have significant resources going to their faith community as a starting point. But I've seen both ways. Evan, how do you hear that?
I'm going to be diplomatic here. Every organization I've ever served in has always shied away from giving an absolute answer to a nuanced question. And I think part of that might be diplomatic in nature in and of itself. It also might be respecting of like, oh my gosh, There's multiple streams of Christianity who all maybe interpret verse or scripture one way or the other. I think things shift and change is the kind of organization that you operate. And here's an example. When I worked for Joyce Meyer Ministries and the Hand of Hope, doing all of this community outreach, the goal, excuse me, was to help people love God and serve more people. Like that was the intent. And the intent wasn't actually a ratio or percentage breakdown of how much went to tithes versus offerings in your specific content. If people had questions, we would maybe offer some resources around that. But if you were Dave Ramsey, for example, I don't know if you guys know Dave here in the States, the Financial Freedom brand, they have some more specific language and thoughts around that because their work is actually like finance, financial freedom, tithing from a faith-based context. They're not a nonprofit organization, but like in that context, I think they speak more directly into, we believe you should do this versus this. In my context, it's always been like, we're grateful for your generosity. We see how you arrived at this versus this. Either way, we want to make sure we're reporting back on what you've given to help you feel not just a sense of accomplishment, but duty to what you believe is right.
Yeah. I'll jump back in. I think as I've reflected a little bit more, Bini, it's a great question. Maybe the reframe that I'd offer for people in the Christian tradition is it's never about the dollars, because dollars they're coming, they're going. Your expression of your generosity is a reflection of your heart and your values and your obedience. And so the way that I heard it recently was stewardship is God's way of raising people, not man's way of raising money. And so people are the people being infinitely valuable, eternally valuable, made in the image of God in the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition, is they are valuable far beyond where they give or how much they give. And so the adherence that they have to their core values, their spiritual values, is what's really at issue when it comes to how much we give away and where we give it to.
I'm stealing that line, by the way. That is just a winner. I mean,
I can't take credit for the stewardship is God's way of raising people, not man's way of raising money. That comes from Wesley Wilmer.
okay, so fine. You gave me the story.
But if he says it 3 more times, he can't own it. I think that's the marketing attribution.
That is how it works. Yes.
3 more podcasts, and then it's John's idea.
You say it loudly and long enough, and it becomes your line.
So it's and it's funny, but it just sort of confirmed how I initially thought. And asking the question about what you call philanthropic priority, like when I was doing fundraising at a smaller, specific kind of organization, that we would call a boutique on some levels. I never expected to supplant someone's like main source of support, which was typically their synagogue or their a lot of kids private school. I was like aiming for number 3 on their list, right? It was just like an understanding that I could never expect, maybe get lucky once in a while, but never get past that as sort of the bar at which I was looking for. And I even told people, like, I'm not looking to be your number 1. I know that number 1 is X and number 2 is Y, and more likely there's a number 3 in there that I'm probably not getting past either. That's like the pet project. And so I would suggest that's why the genesis of the question is really just trying to understand is that unique to my community, or does that sort of roll across? And what you're saying is it's a roll across, and it's very much more of a check on the entirety of the system than it is specifically to one community or the next. The only thing is you say better than I have said it.
Yeah, I would. There's some anecdotal data out there that's then backed up by statistical data. Dr. Russell James, who does all the work on original research for philanthropic charitable giving in bequests, wills, gifts and trusts, etc. He'll point out that people who do not have children will give the largest gifts in wills to charity, right? And that's an expression of what you're just saying, right? We look for opportunities to give to our church and our kids and the organizations that are close to us, and so in the absence of those people who still want to give, who still want to, in his terminology, have symbolic immortality or have their values live on when they're gone, they're going to be investing deeply in the things that they care about.
Well, I want to try and zoom out a little bit because I know we don't have so much more time, but I want to try to get sort of a little bit of a wider lens, just in your work over the last, let's say, year or two, are there trends you're seeing in the fundraising world playing out right now? There are specific things you're paying attention to as things unfold?
I'll go first, and then John, we're probably pretty aligned on this because we end up having a lot of like after client conversations or regroups. And the first thing that I would say is I am noticing with AI or technology or like all of the things at our disposal now, it's not for lack of ideas to try or things to attempt that people are like, I just don't have any way to find a new idea. It's usually about cutting through the noise and figuring out like how do I take all those ideas and either combine them or cut away the things I don't need to focus on now so that I have a simple plan to follow. I don't see many executive directors or development directors coming to us and saying like I've never Googled how to do a fundraising plan. I've never done X and I don't know where to go. It's usually how do I know that this is going to work? Or I've got 3 equally good things that we could do, but I've only got time for 1. How do I know which one to prioritize and which one do I like fall in line to first? I think that's probably the biggest thing is how do I synthesize everything down into a simple plan to follow? John, anything you would add into that?
I'd say one of the trends that I'm noticing is number of donors are down, but dollars are up. That's not news to anybody. Everyone sees the fundraising effectiveness reports and the wide reports that speak to that. But what that means then is individual relationships that are cultivated well becomes ever more important for thoughtful fundraisers. So, if the industry wide is in a spot where it's becoming harder to acquire and retention is becoming more important, what do we need to do in order to care well for the needs of our supporters who do already know and trust and like the organization? And in my opinion, the trend that we need to be watching very closely is how can we increase authenticity in our relationships rather than automation? Because if you're going to get into a spot where you have your key relationships that you must cultivate, you can't risk it on getting into a spot where they feel like you have a screen between you and them. And so that's why when we're usually talking to small organizations, they may have a lot of things that keep them busy, but what we help them do is kind of break through and get their focus back on their top 100 or 150 relationships, because those people are likely to continue giving and to continue giving more because of how the wealth trends look.
Yeah. One of the things that Raymond and I talked about early in the calendar year, was trends for 2025. And one of the things that I threw out there was in real life, very much the sense because of all the automations and artificial stuff that's going on around there, that people will crave more and more and more actual real personal connection and actually in-person connection and not just a virtual space. As much as that's hard to do in some cases because there are just distances as a factor, but simply just being in the room, however you can do that, a real way, because of Evan, you called it the noise that's out there. And John, you talked about the relationship piece of it. So those things really go together on some level. And you need to be able to figure out how to cultivate further and deeper those relationships that you have, especially because of all the noise and all the other stuff and all the artificial, and the ease with which you can just simply automate it away and not.
And AI, automation, these things are progressing at geometric exponential rates of change. And so it's hard for humans to grasp what that actually looks like or feels like on the back end. But I recently saw an article where an organization was testing out virtual gift officers. They had a VGO who could answer any question for a donor and cultivate them through the process and share alumni stories and give them an interaction with the organization that wasn't actually moderated by a human, but felt like it was. And, in talking with another thinker on fundraising, his immediate thought was, well, why isn't there a VDO, a virtual donor officer, who they have their AI bot go interact with the organization's virtual fundraiser? No one needs to have any conversation at all in that scenario. And what's lost there is that authentic connection, the in real life opportunity to meet people's needs.
Oh, that's a great video to do. I think that would be hilarious to see the virtual gift officer talking to the virtual donor officer in some sort of gibberish language about donation
Exactly.
and see what happens at the end of that. Yeah, I actually, like a few months ago, I floated the idea of creating an AI caller to call donors just to update their data to make sure we had good data. And I thought, oh, it's a really good idea. And I bounced it off a few people. And one person said to me, if that happens, they can guarantee that I will never donate to them again. I was like, really? Yeah, they're just too weird and not real. And I know that they're just sort of mailing it in. I'm not interested. I was like, wow, okay. But I hear it. I definitely hear it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the speed that's offered to us through AI isn't always a win.
It's true. It's true. We're actually just having a conversation with somebody about slowing down that their specific work in the storytelling space that they're working in, slowing down the story, elongating the story, giving the story more time to really take root was really important for some of the work that they were doing. So it definitely relates to that for sure. It's like, I'm stunning people into silence today. I don't know if
That's a mic drop moment. Yeah.
it's the glasses, it's the sign behind me. I don't know what it is, it's Raimy, it's the aura of turning 50 is
That's
just
what it is.
overwhelming people around me.
Gravitas. That's gravitas, right?
Gravitas.
That's what my kids called it. Well, used other words for it,
Oh.
like old and slow and gray hair and all that other stuff. But
Uh-huh.
I'm curious, guys, just in relation to that, what you're just talking about, and you're working with a lot of organizations. So what are some of the leaders that you're working with missing? Like, what are the blind spots that they're just simply not? Some of the stuff I think you just talked about is in relation to the blind spots, but are there other things that you're bringing back to them? And you guys talked about one earlier, was just the idea that what got you here actually can help get you further. But what other blind spots are the leaders of the average typical nonprofit that you're working with just experiencing?
I'll go first. And I think two things come to mind. Number one, in the age of like CRMs and stats and donor reports and all the stuff, it's easy to like push that aside and be like, I don't know if I have time for that, or that's really complicated. But one of the main things that we see time and time again when doing either consulting and coaching or building out a custom fundraising plan is that if you're using something like a CRM and there is a button that you can hit that says get live report, like if your data is in a decent spot, you might actually be surprised with how easy it is to find lapsed donors who didn't give within the last 12 months. John and I were working with an organization that had 6 figures of gifts in a relatively small organization filter into their live report, and they just weren't looking at it. It was enabled, it was there, and they were like, and I quickly reminded them it's much easier to get someone to give again who already cares about what you do than to find new donors. And they were looking for new donors. How do we get the next donor? How do we find new donors? And I'm like, you actually probably already have a group of people who care enough that if you were to engage or re-engage, you might hit your revenue and your relationship goal at the same time. The second thing I think I'm seeing a lot is the idea of I don't want to ask for money getting in the way of taking any action at all. Like we were working with an organization just a week ago, and I handed them a couple of texts because they prefer to text versus email with their donors. It's a small organization, and they've never asked for money once. They've been an organization for about 20 years. Never once have they asked for money. And I was like, wow, like that's a different level of faith. I said, but if you don't want to dive into just asking everybody carte blanche for a whole bunch of money, what if you just started open-ended conversations and see where that conversation led? And you'd be surprised how many of those end up resulting in a gift or a bigger commitment or a next step of some kind. It's not just you have to know how do I pitch them or get them to say yes to X dollars. It's proximity to donors that will actually give you those long-term relationship and revenue goals too.
John, how about you?
I think I jump in and just say the organization has to rely both on the shared values. So your values, your theology, your messaging, but also being able to communicate impact. So doing just one or the other is kind of the two sides of a narrow road that fall into the ditch. And if you are always in the realm of quoting Bible verses, talking about the values and that sort of stuff, but never showing your worth, people can get to a spot where they say, if I'm wise about where I give, how do I know that this is being effective? And if you're over here only ever talking about that, but never telling people why you're doing what you're doing, then you get to a spot where it does become a little bit more transactional in the mind of the supporter.
Evan, can I put you on the spot and just ask you, do you have like
Sure.
again, a broad strokes, rough sketch of what a re-engagement plan for lapsed donors looks like?
Yeah, and John are actually working on a beta version of a product or some sort of resource that we can give to folks. I think the channel and tactic is more of the outflow of the strategy. So it's not just having an email or just having a text message or just having a phone call script. It's having more of a here's how we want to approach our lapsed donors. For some folks, if you have enough time and capacity, it might be, if you're a local organization, that you ask people out to dinner or coffee if they're at a certain threshold or tier. But I love to say below whatever your major gift level is, if you define that threshold, start with something that is personal but more scalable. And then if it's higher into the threshold, like they hit your major gift tier, figure out like what can I do that would be an unbalanced investment of time, knowing that I can't do it for everybody, but I maybe could go out to coffee with them, or I could find a gift that is inexpensive but meaningful, package that up and send that to them. Not asking for money, but just saying like, oh my gosh, I wanted to communicate the impact with a simple thank you.
Awesome.
Good stuff, guys. We're almost running out of time, so I want to do a little bit of like I don't want to call it a speed round because I feel like the answers are going to come a little slowly here. But
I'm ready. I'm ready. I have my buzzer.
Here we go.
I got my buzzer over here. I'm ready.
okay, good. Best advice in fundraising you ever got?
I'll jump in. And this is actually a framework that came out of a different resource, but I apply it to fundraising, and it's my mantra: action versus fear. If you're worried about how something is going, find a positive action that you can take right now, and it becomes easier and easier to do it over time and tackle the big problem that you're facing.
I love that.
Do for one what you would like to do for many. And that's not from me or for John. That's from Pastor Andy Stanley. You guys have probably heard him. He's an author, speaker, pastor. But oftentimes we get stuck in this, I wish I could do blank for everyone on my donor file of 500 plus people. And it's just not scalable. But oh my gosh, do for one what I would love to be able to do for many.
Awesome.
That's a good one. I'm going to ask the next one. Unless Raimy, you're going to dive in here.
No, you're on a roll. Go.
Good. If you get to ban one word from fundraising, what would that word be?
I'll jump in and say silos. There's so much talk about silos at profits, and the crazy thing about it is you have to have a differentiated marketing for your donors and for the rest of the organization, because people make decisions donate to you in a different process than whether or not they use your services. So,
I thought we were going to get the rest of the answer there.
I think we lost him for a second. It was so good at booted him out.
I thought that was just you.
That's me kicking him out.
Mm,
I would say our, O-U-R. If I could eliminate one word, it's the we or the our. And it's so easy. Like I write for a living for a lot of clients, and I still find first drafts that have too many we's and not enough you's.
Raimy, do you want to dive in on that one? Because I can leave the room right now, and you guys could have an hour conversation.
I just want to hug Evan. That's all that wants to happen, right? I just want to hug. I've never felt so far away from saying this before in my life. Evan, what's the?
Go for it. Just before you do that, Raimy. On that, when I joined when Raimy and I met at Cosmatch at the company 5 years ago, I had come out of being the fundraiser. And had come out of this life as a rabbinic figure. And in my sermons, I always use the term we. Like, we have to do this. We have to do more. And then he's like, you can't talk like that in the fundraising space. I'm like, what are you talking about? And every time he just like pulled out all the we's and dropped in all the you's. And I was like, okay, I get it. So that's why I said like you guys could have this conversation without me, but yeah.
Evan, what's the best fundraising book you've read, or like fundraising adjacent book you've read in the last year?
Oh, I'm going to go fundraising adjacent, and it's called The Psychology of Money. Morgan Housel, I don't know if you've read or heard. There's several good books on either like personal finance or like the psychology of money, but I realize whether it's in business ownership and an entrepreneur or as a fundraiser, my personal feeling, theology, approach to money has a huge influence on how I then make financial decisions and how I ask or spend money or connect to other people about money. It's an underdeveloped skill. My parents never taught me a whole lot about how to think about money. They gave me a budget template to do like personal, but we never talked about how to think about money. And actually, it's one of the main topics I want to impart into my kids. In addition to like that, I never got. How do we build a psychology of money that is faith informed, but also just healthy and helpful for every life?
I had all my kids read it.
It's so good. It's so good.
Bini, can I borrow it? You have a copy?
Yeah, but I would say at least 2/3 of your kids are too young to read it.
I don't care about them. I want to read it.
Well, I read it.
Bedtime stories with Raimy.
I had my older kids read it. My youngest son looked at me like I was out of my mind. But because I wanted them, just like you said it really right. Evan. I wanted them to have an approach and a relationship with money, better, different, smarter, deeper, well thought out, far further in advance than I ever did as a person. And that book very much, just early on, right away, in some of the early essays, gets right into that. And I think it definitely how you think about money and how you think about philanthropy as well. So it's a great choice.
Awesome. John, what's the best fundraising book or fundraising adjacent book you've read in the last year?
I'm going to re-reference the book that I was talking about earlier. I actually have a copy here. It's called Great Fundraising Organizations, How and Why the World's Best Charities Excel at Raising Money. It's a leadership book that talks about what fundraising actually feels like, looks like, and how an organization becomes fundraising aligned with the rest of the organization. How do you bridge the gap between the culture shift in your organization amongst the fundraisers, who often have one psychological profile, and the programs team, the executive director, the CFO, who often have a very different profile? So how do you bridge those gaps? How do you bring the organization into fundraisable alignment?
Awesome.
Amazing. Okay, last question. Ready? It's late. You're working late. You're on your strategic plan. You're up against a deadline. What's the snack that Evan and John go to late at night that they're not proud to admit it out?
I'm grabbing a bag of pistachios that I have in my office. My son likes to bust in and ask for snacks, and I always have a bag of those sitting around.
If I had the buzzer, I would have hit the buzzer with the X, like where you turn the chair around. Like, John, that's a healthy snack. That's not a snack that you're not proud of. What is the unhealthy snack? Tell us the unhealthy. Is it cookies and milk? There's got to be an unhealthy snack. Pistachios.
My wife makes fun of me for eating all of the chips in the house. We can't keep chips around. I'll go right through the bag.
Okay.
I'll eat plain tortilla chips, man. I'm a salty guy all day long.
Okay, I love it. Nice.
Okay. I will follow suit. I do love a good, like, either cracker and hummus, although that might be a little bit too healthy. Chips would be great. In St. Louis, there's a local chip company called Goat Chips, and it's like not like Goat the animal, but like greatest of all time. Like, just want to clear, it's not made out of goat, and it's like fairly healthy as far as chips go, and they are addicting. They are so good.
Oh, amazing.
This podcast is now sponsored by all of our favorite snacks.
Well,
There we go.
Thinking we're going to add John's affiliate link to that book so that when people buy it on Amazon,
I gotta call Colin and Alan and the team at Revolutionize, see if I can get paid for all these times I keep talking about it with people.
Amazing. All right, guys. Evan, John, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. we have to do this again because I feel like we've said this a lot lately with our guests. It just gets started. We realize there's so much to talk about, and we're going to have to do a second round at some point in the future.
Looking forward to
I'd
it.
love that.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Bye, guys.